Howdy, y'all from Texas. 170 local Canadians learned about how to cash flow in the USA, the easy way, advance, and then we're going to advance full-time investing in foreclosures and mortgage notes in the USA from Canada, including expert level strategies that capitalized on the post-financial crisis. All this and more on today's Truth About Real Estate Investing show. My name is Erwin Cito, host of this podcast, and we've done over 350 weekly episodes of the show over an hour length each since 2016. And I want to say thank you to everyone who braved the storm to attend our US investing workshop on Saturday. Thank you to Zoom, so we can include all of our friends from all over the country to learn more about what I consider to be the best practice for Canadians to invest directly into real estate. I believe it's the right investment for most people most of the time. And this will form the next chapter of my family's investment portfolio. Thank you to my friends at Share, the asset manager, who will form my one-stop shop to acquire and manage the property managers for my properties across the Sunbelt states. Thank you to Land City, who shared how financing in the USA is 10 times easier than it is here for the same income properties. That should be music to the ears, especially to all self-employed people, such as myself, who don't report much income, or anyone with bruised credit. Financing is partly easier in the USA because it's easier to find properties that have positive cash flow and no rent control. This week, we have a professional full-time real estate investor in Chad Urbshott. He actually lives near me in Oakille, Ontario, but he's actually a rare find. There's only two people like Chad, maybe two and a half, who have been successfully investing in the USA and he started in about 2013, and he's been doing so remotely from Oakville, Canada. He's tried pretty much every small residential investing strategy, fix and flips, wholesale, but he's found his niche by specializing in U.S. mortgage notes. This is going to be complicated. I'll let Chad explain it. Chad discusses his journey and strategies in this complex field of note investing. He emphasizes the importance of thorough due diligence, explains the various aspects of note investing, and shares his experience, including the challenges and rewards of this niche market. I know I've talked a lot about boring investing for my own personal style and for what I think is right for most people most of the time, but I wanted to offer you, my listener, the other side of the extreme, for those who want a full-time strategy that's worked for someone that has been working consistently for someone as talented as Chad. Chad pulls no punches, though. He does talk about how his returns are not smooth and easy, but he does manage to make them work out to about a 30% annualized return over a year, and that includes wins and losses. So note his returns, the risk that he takes on, the effort that he has to put in. So please take lots of notes for those interested in more of a full-time career. I'm sure that some of you will want to listen to this episode more than once. You can find Chad on social media by searching his name, Chad Urbshott. Chad, I think we can all spell that, Urbshott, Urbshott, or his website, equigrowth.com. And you can find the links in the show notes. All right, so please enjoy the show.
Hi, Chad. What's keeping you busy these days?
I'm trying to buy some good deals on some mortgage notes right now.
That's a mouthful. To me, it's a mouthful. I don't even say many words. Okay, so what is a mortgage note?
So a mortgage note, so we'll probably get into this, I'm sure, in more detail, but so primarily, or 100% buy stuff in the U.S. This might be a long-winded answer, but I'll try to keep it as succinct as possible because we can get into more details in a bit. But so mortgage note in the U.S., there's a big difference between Canada and the U.S. So in Canada, when you get a mortgage, you got your big six banks and then a handful of community banks and trusts, and then a few B lenders like mortgage investment corporations. So there's maybe less than 100, I would say. Whereas in Canada or in the U.S., there's 5,000 plus banks.
50x is not 10x.
Yeah, it's way more. Yeah. So in the U.S., the banks, they're as large as J.P. Morgan that have hundreds of billions or probably even trillions of assets under management. Mortgage isn't one of their big component. I mean, I guess Wells Fargo might be I think they're the biggest mortgage holder in the U.S. So the whole billions, maybe up to I wouldn't say trillions, but hundreds of billions worth of mortgages. However, then you have your small banks, the community banks that are in small towns that might only have one or two branches, and they might only have, say, $50 million under management. Well, those banks don't want to actually hold on their mortgages. The way they make their money is not by, interest rates are now 8% in the U.S., but they used to be 3% for quite a few years. So they're not going to issue a mortgage for 3% and hold on to it and try to make money off of that, or get the cash flow from that, because that's not a very sustainable business model. What they do is, majority of the banks in the U.S. will originate a mortgage and they'll tack points on top. So a point is
1%.
Like 100 basis points.
100 basis
1%.
points. So 0.1%.
Yeah. So they'll tack on 1 or 2% on top of the origination of the mortgage. So let's say someone's going in for $100,000 mortgage. They'll the fee to them is going to be, say, $1,000 to $2,000. They don't actually have that money typically, because it's a fractional banking system. We could probably go on and on about how that works. It's the same here as in Canada. So they get that money from what's called a warehouse line, which is like basically a line of credit. So warehouse line is synonymous with you or me getting a line of credit. So they'll loan that, or borrow that $100,000 from the warehouse line, which typically has a slightly lower interest rate than the person getting the mortgage, the borrower.
A wholesale rate versus a retail rate.
Yeah, exactly. However, so the difference between the two interest rates, called the net interest margin, is very, very slim. So like I said, they're not, they only have $50,000 or $50 million of assets under management, and they're only making a 0.1% net interest margin. That's not a very sustainable business. However, like I said earlier, they want to originate the mortgage, collect the origination fees, and then turn around and flip that as soon as possible. So they'll hang on to the mortgage for maybe a month or two, and they'll sell it into the secondary market, which in turn, if it's insured by the equivalent in the U.S. is to us here at CMHC is Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. Many people have probably heard that term before. That gets bundled into a mortgage-backed security typically. So once they sell that loan in the secondary market, they can pay back the warehouse line of credit and do it all over again. So if they do that 3 or 4 times in a year, you tack up that origination fee. You're looking at 5, 6, 7, 8, 10% on that same $100,000 that they're rotating. So the point I'm getting at here is, in Canada, majority of the banks, they hang on to their mortgages, like they sit in their balance sheets, whereas in the U.S., I would say probably 90% of the mortgages get held on the bank's balance sheets here, whereas in the U.S., probably only 10% get held on the balance sheet, so they get sold again into the secondary market. So the difference between here and Canada is there's generally not a inventory of mortgages that are ever for sale, whereas in the U.S. it's 100% different. There's hundreds of thousands of mortgages that get sold every year. So I was going to say that I was going to try to make a short answer to the question, but it ended up being a longer question. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an understanding how the dichotomy between the two our two countries work.
As we get into your journey, I think people want to go back and listen to that, because when people understand why you're getting to mortgage notes, then they'll appreciate. So let's go back to. So first off, you live locally. You live in Oakville. Yeah. Right. But you're not a Canadian investor.
So yeah, I started out 2006, 2007 buying properties here in Canada, up until about 2012, 13ish, and I at the time was going back and forth to Florida. My in-laws had a place down there, so I was going back and forth probably 2-3 times a year. Long story short, ended up going to a conference that was put on by the Canadian Real Estate magazine. I don't know if they still have it or not, but I haven't
they
been in
stopped.
a few years.
I haven't seen it in a while.
Yeah, I haven't seen it since COVID, but
damn COVID.
Yeah, it ruined everything. So I think it was 2012. Go down to this conference. It was in Toronto, downtown, and there was 3 or 4 vendors from the U.S. that were touting I don't know what the term was then, but it's called turnkey investment properties, where basically they'll find a property for you, they'll put a tenant in it, and they property manage it for you. So you write a check, and hopefully start collecting cash flow. While I was there, they were showing some numbers on, one of the presentations, and I was looking at they're doing a comparison between the rent ratios compared to purchase price, and I was blown away. Like it was like 6 to 1, you know, rent to purchase price, and I was just like, wow, this is insane. I can't believe the difference between here and Canada and how much more you can get for your total capital invested. And that was kind of when the light bulb went off. And at the time in the U.S., it was that was right after the great financial crisis. It hit 2008, 2009, 2010. Prices were bottoming out and starting to rebound at that point. And that was when the light bulb went off, and I was like, wow, this is a opportunity of a lifetime, as you're probably well aware. And Canada didn't really experience the same. It was a bit of a hiccup back in 2009. I think things dropped like 10-15%, but then they just started going back up again.
I barely noticed a recession.
No,
like these times are way harder than then.
Yeah. So most places in the U.S., places like property prices went down between 30 and 50%, even more in some states like in Las Vegas or Nevada and Florida, they dropped 70%. Anyway, so that's how it kind of piqued my interest, and I'm like, wow, this is incredible that you can buy these kinds of properties for for $50,000, you're getting $800 or $900 a month rent, whereas here you're at the time you're paying $300,000 and you're maybe getting $1,700 a month rent, $1,500 to $1,700. So I was like, I thought, man, this is a no-brainer. So yeah, so that's how my journey started buying U.S. real estate.
So what did you start buying?
So the first couple deals I bought were rentals. They weren't turnkey by any means. They were far from it. They were memory serves, one was tenanted, which was tenanted by a Section 8, and I don't know how much you've talked about U.S.
so
real
folks
estate.
on government assistance.
Yeah. Okay.
Low income government assistance.
Yeah. So it's basically their income's guaranteed, usually up to a certain amount. It's usually about 80%, and then they have to kick in the rest.
Right.
So I had no idea what that even was when I bought this property. It was already tenanted. That property actually did walk through, and it wasn't in the greatest shape. It was kind of like a condo townhouse in a community in Florida. And then I bought another one. I think it was a condo townhouse. That one needed a little bit of work to fix up. Once we got it fixed up, got a renter in, and then so I can't remember how much. They were probably around $100,000 each at that point, U.S. And at that point, I'm like, well, that's great. I've got
Sorry, what were the rents? They're $100K each. What were the rents? Do you remember? Over 1,000.
Over 1,000.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They're over 1,000. I'm guessing like 1,100. That was like 2012 or 13, I think, somewhere around there. So yeah, they're probably around that.
So above the 1% rule.
Yeah, well above it. So yeah, when I bought those, I'm like, oh, that's great. I've just expended all my capital. But I was still working at the time. I had a corporate job, and I'm like, well, so much for my my plan to really dive deep into the U.S. Real estate market. It wasn't in the world. I could have started raising money, but
so sorry. Did you use all your cash, or you used all your home equity line, or
I think
how were you tapped out?
I think it was probably a combination of both. Like a home equity line at the time. So
right, because you couldn't get any sort of mortgage.
Oh, no, there was there was like...
It was a financial crisis. They weren't even lending.
No, they weren't even lending to U.S. citizens at the time, let alone
Canadians,
foreign nationals or Canadians, yeah. So I had those for a while, and then, long story short, I ended up selling them, and the market was going up so quick at that time. I think I made like 15% or 20% within a year. I'm like, holy cow. And
imagine if that was leverage returns.
Yeah, it was all cash, but then I stumbled into, not stumbled, but I started looking into buying foreclosures, like not bank-owned properties yet, but foreclosures rate, they call it the courthouse steps. Down in Florida, you don't go to the courthouse. It's actually all online. A lot of the counties are now online, but they used to, back in the day, you'd actually line up in a group of people at the courthouse, and the sheriff or whoever had jurisdiction over the sales there would call out the property, or it might have been a lawyer that was representing the property. They would call out and it'd be an auction. But like I said, in Florida, it was actually online. So I could buy them from up here, which was a lot more convenient than going down
So
to
what information do you have on the property? You're just buying it online.
So, so you want to...
Wait, sorry, what year is this, first off?
2013.
Okay, you're buying Florida properties online. Okay, continue.
Yeah, so... Yeah. So buying foreclosures aren't for the faint of heart. They're typically not in the greatest shape because if the people aren't paying their mortgage, they're usually not paying their taxes. They're definitely not fixing the property up. They're not putting any money into it.
Yeah. Well, my experience, they usually take anything of value as well.
Oh yeah,
they usually take the appliances.
Yeah.
Too.
Oh yeah. Some of them will strip the copper out. Like they'll pour concrete down the toilets and
That's nice of them.
yeah, exactly. So that was like 2013, 14-ish. I think I started looking into that. So my very first deal I bought, or might have been my second. I can't remember exactly, but this is like, one of those deals that I'll never ever forget. If it were to happen to me now, probably wouldn't be such a big deal since it was one of my first ones that I bought down there, it's just ingrained in my memory, and I still have PTSD from it to this day. So we buy this property. I should go back and ask the question about how can you buy them online from up here. Well, they're not for the faint of heart, as I was saying. You need to make sure that, first of all, you have to get someone to drive by, make sure the property's still there, it's not burnt to the ground. If you can, if it's vacant, sometimes, this is trespassing, but you might be able to convince someone to, walk around the property and peek in the windows to see what kind of shape that property might be on the inside. And if, the person's brave enough, they might even open a window and go in and have a look at it. So that's the very first step in due diligence. There's a whole bunch. I used to have a checklist of stuff, like 10 or 15 items you had to go through. But then the other biggest thing was checking the title. So when you have a foreclosure, there could be a whole bunch of stuff that's tacked onto the title. Like, the number one thing is unpaid taxes. Like I said before, if they're not paying their mortgage, probably not paying their taxes, and they could be behind 10 or 15 grand in taxes. Some states, they have to be paid before it goes to foreclosure, but in Florida they didn't. So if you bought a property,
you're liable.
You're liable for
you're inheriting the
unpaid
debt.
taxes.
Yeah.
The big clincher, which I got stung by a couple times, is municipal fines. So if someone has been doing work on the property without a permit, there could be a fine of, I'm just throwing a number out there, but it's not unheard of to hear like $100 a day until they come in and rectify, either get a permit or take down whatever they're building. That's just one example. Or if they're not cutting the grass and the code enforcement officer comes by and flags it and doesn't get cut within a couple weeks, they'll send someone out to cut the grass, and they'll keep doing it, and they'll charge you, not $25, it'll be $250 to cut the grass. And then there's a fine on top of, like, depending on the county and the state,
And it all goes in your property tax.
It eventually will get tacked on the property tax, but it accumulates and it gets tagged against the property. So those are the two big major things you need to look out for when you're buying foreclosures: is the condition of the property, and which you can't typically see the inside, but you take a good guess on. A good rule of thumb is the outside's garbage, then the inside's probably garbage as well. It usually holds true 8 out of 10 times. I've been burnt a couple times where property looked pristine from the outside and was absolute dog's breakfast on the inside. But that's a story for another day, or I could get into it later. So those are the two big things to look out for. So back to one of the first ones I bought at foreclosure. So I had a guy down there, a guy I partnered up with. I think when we were having lunch a couple weeks ago, I was sharing the story about how I ended up doing some due diligence on him afterwards. This is one of a couple partners I had, and this guy had a rap sheet as long as your arm, and it wasn't long divesting from that partnership. But anyway, so he was driving around looking at the properties, and he was actually doing the bidding for me. So I put way too much trust in this guy. So he did a great job. Like I said, drive by the property, looked great. It was actually in a gated community, and I think he had I can't remember if he had a realtor's license at the time, but he was able to get in past the gate to say, hey, I'm a realtor looking to sell this property for a bank. So we took pictures from the outside. He probably didn't look in the windows, maybe didn't get out of his car. But in any event, so we buy this property for like 160 grand, something like that, US, obviously. And at the time it was probably worth 200. So wasn't that great of a margin. I usually like to have a lot more margin than that, but this guy kind of jumped the gun and bought it anyway.
Right. Because it'd probably take a long time to sell, would it not?
Well, no, usually. So back in that time.
No, I'm sorry, but if you bought it for 160 to resell it for 200. that'd probably take a while.
No. So back in those days, well, even still true today, that was when inventory was starting to ramp up or starting to dwindle. This is around 2014, 13, 14. So the bottom was in, and everybody was scrambling to get cheap properties at the time. So the business plan at the time was, and it was a good business plan. It was just tough to, I wouldn't say tough to execute, but at scale it's hard to execute, is buy them from the auctions and turn around and list it the next day like on MLS and then just flip it for a quick buck. Or throw kind of a lipstick on a pig, it's called a wholesale. So so that's kind of like wholesaling. You buy it at an auction, you turn around and you sell it on either to a bunch of wholesale buyers, or you put it in MLS and someone will buy it obviously as like a retail property, as they buy a retail property. But hotel was kind of a term that was coined back in the day where you would just kind of put like the bare minimum into it so that it was somewhat livable. So you maybe replace the carpets, paint it, lipstick on a pig kind of thing. So we do that just to turn them over quicker. In any event, this back to this property that we bought in this gated community. So we get the property, and I think this guy's name was Dean. He calls me up and he goes, because he went in to get the locks changed on it. Oh no! First of all, we had to evict the homeowner, so that took a month or two.
So this is the homeowner that stayed through the foreclosure process.
Yeah. So we had to get the sheriff down, and they show up with typically bulletproof vests and.
I'm surprised the bank didn't take care of it. Well,
No. So, no, the bank they only take care of it if they take possession after the sale. So if it reverts back to the bank and no one bids on it, so the bank becomes the owner. It's called a real estate owned, or an REO.
Oh, okay, so foreclosures before the bank takes possession.
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. So if no one buys it at the auction, like if the bank sets a price high, like too high, and no one bids on it or doesn't bid up to what they want for it, then it goes back to the bank, and then the bank has to take care of all this, eviction and cleaning it out and all that. That's what I do now, but we'll get into that, I'm sure. In any event, so we take this property over. Dean calls me up and I said, how's it look on the inside? And he goes, well, it's not the best one I've ever seen. I'm like, okay, because this guy was elderly and he'd been doing this for a long time. And I go, what do you mean? He said, well, there's a bit of a mess to clean up, and that's pretty typical. Anyways, I won't get into all the details. Ended up, this guy was running a puppy mill in his property. And
that's gross. I haven't seen that before.
Oh, it was absolutely disgusting. There was feces and urine.
It's bad enough when there's 1, 2, 3 pets that haven't been cleaned up after. You're talking about a puppy mill.
Yeah, the entire
dozens of animals.
And it wasn't just in one spot in the house. It was throughout the entire thing, throughout. So you could see where they had the cages, and the stains were around it, on the carpet.
But this is something you could find just looking in the windows.
Yeah, like I said,
you hear a million dog voices.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know what happened when he did the inspection. But if people are living there, you don't want to get out and start looking in the windows, right? Because especially in the U.S., someone can come out with a gun.
Guns, yeah.
Yeah. So you got to be pretty cautious.
This is Florida.
So so we take this property. So not only did they left with us that, they took it's called an air handler unit in the U.S. So it's like a furnace in the inside of the house. It's not a furnace because they do have heat there, but it's typically in a closet. They're not here in Canada where you have most mechanical furnaces are in a basement, right?
Yeah. There is no basements. Yeah.
No, there's no basements in Florida, so they ripped it out of the wall with all the copper piping. So it was just trashed. Put some concrete down the drains, that kind of stuff. So that wasn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem was the urine and the feces had soaked down through not only the carpet but into the subflooring, into the drywall. So we had to
got it.
Yeah, we had to not only take up all the flooring and all that, we had to replace some of the subflooring, take about a foot off of all the drywall around the entire.
You basically had a urine flood.
Yeah, it was. Luckily, it was built with metal studs, so the studs were fine.
Right.
Otherwise, it might have had to be condemned. Luckily for that.
Luckily, they didn't rust. Maybe they're aluminum.
Yeah, who knows? They could have, but yeah, so we did all that. Obviously cost quite a bit of money, but so at the end of the
More
day,
than expected.
end of the day, we had it for sale. I can't remember how much we're selling it for, like 180 grand. So it was basically going to break even on it. So the day of closing or the day before closing, so you don't have to have an attorney to do closings down in Florida. It's called a title company or title closer, escrow agent, several different terms. They either called me or emailed me, said, so we got the title report back and there's these municipal fines from the city. I'm like, well, what for? And I'm totally green to this at this point. I had no idea that. Well, I knew that you had to check out for these unrecorded. They're not even attached to the title yet. So if you do a title search beforehand, they won't even show up. Like they're just registered with the city. So you actually have to call into the city to see if there's any of these fines. So this guy Dean, him and his team, they did all that. However, this was it wasn't through the code enforcement department. It was, so this guy was selling these puppies all throughout the city in different Walmart parking lots. So you could see the actual fines that were written up against this guy. $28,000 worth of fines. And so how it works is they eventually turn into judgments, but they get tacked onto the property. So yeah, that was. And
you're liable.
Yep. Well, yeah, you have to. If you want to sell the property, you got to pay those out. So, long story short, I ended up hiring an attorney, and nowadays I would just negotiate myself with the city because I paid this guy way too much for how much he got it down. I think he got it down to like $10,000 from the $28,000, which is still a lot better than 28. But I probably could have got down to way less than that nowadays, just because I run up against this all the time nowadays.
You're in sold houses, yeah, run into it all the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This is like.
Oh my God.
Second nature now. It's like,
welcome to the truth about real estate investing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Any event. So yeah, I walked away from that deal losing probably about $10,000. I think it was. So that was my one of my forays into buying foreclosures. I'm sure we're going to talk about note investing.
Yeah. And you want to do more of these, eh?
Well, so made some pretty good money on the next few. Okay. They weren't nearly as traumatic as that one.
All in Florida as well?
Yeah, down in South Florida. But then probably around 2014-15 is when, like, if you Google it, there's KKR. I can't remember what they stand for exactly. Blackstone's another one. These are huge funds. Starlight Homes. They came in with the idea of buying all these homes up, at dirt cheap prices and turning them all into rentals.
Yeah, my friend Dimitri used to exact Starlight.
It
was actually him you were running into.
Right. I don't know why my thinks I'm talking to it. So they swooped in and started buying all these foreclosures at like retail prices. So usually you'd buy them at like 60-70 cents on what you could probably sell them for. Well, they're paying 80, 90, $1 like at par. So they were paying the same price as a property next door that sold for that was not a foreclosure, that was like in way better shape.
So they're outbidding you.
Yeah, and it was just like, well, there goes that business plan. That was kind of short-lived.
So I just want to pause you right there because my thing is like, because retail investors, like most people listening or myself, like you end up, if you're investing with the institution, like you overpaid.
Yeah.
Which is why my thing has always been like, you got to do some of your own investing.
Yeah. Well, hindsight's 20/20 though, because these institutions were buying these when the cap rates were 10-12%.
That's amazing. So it's still worth it.
Oh, totally. But they're paying top dollar. Yeah. However, they're still hanging on to them 8 years later, and those things have doubled in value. So their IRR on that is like through the roof, right? So they're getting a 10% cap rate on what they paid, on top of doubling in price. I'm just throwing hypothetical numbers out there, but they're probably not too far off. So I had another partner at this point in time, and I was complaining to him about these prices going up, and he said, well, why don't you buy the mortgage from the bank? And I'm like, what do you mean the mortgage from the bank? Mm-hmm. How do you, like, before it gets a foreclosure? I'm like, what do you mean? Like, it was a foreign concept to me. Right. And
so go up the ladder, go up the chain.
Yeah. So yeah, you could so you can't like call up a bank and say, hey, can I buy this mortgage before it goes to foreclosure? They're just going to tell you to go fly a kite. But it took a long time to infiltrate the market and figure out how to do this. But there's it's called the secondary market, and it's not like you're buying and selling on an exchange or an MLS. It's all networking, and it's all done, like the good old days. Probably like 50 years ago on the stock market, where everything was done by people are screaming across the room, hey, I'll buy this from you, I'll buy that from you. So it's not quite like that, but it's basically all over email, calling up people, say, hey, what do you have in your inventory, kind of thing. There are some exchanges now that are trying to become kind of like an MLS or like a stock exchange, but they haven't really taken off, that sell mortgages. There's a few smaller ones that I buy and sell some off of, mostly sell on there.
So sorry, who are these participants in the exchange, in the secondary market? Are they representatives of the lenders? Or
yeah, exactly. So okay. Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people have probably heard the movie The Big Short. Yeah. So this is a perfect. It gives you the exact rundown on how the great financial crisis was caused. Well, not the main reason, but in a nutshell, all these people that had the dream of home ownership back starting 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everybody under the sun, well, I think it was the Bush administration enacted, was it Bush? I can't remember which president it was, but there was this new act that they're basically, I don't know the exact details of it, but it was like, give everybody a mortgage. Like everybody in the U.S. should have a.
Yeah, we're kind of like that here too. That's the whole point of CMHC, make it easier for homeowners.
Exactly, yeah, CMHC. However, they loosen the purse strings way too much. Like
way too much. Obviously, hindsight's
anybody
easy.
with a pulse walking through the door, whether the credit score was 800 or 580, was getting a mortgage. Yeah. There was no requirements to produce income. Like, I'm making $100 grand a year. They would just write that down. Oh, he makes $100 grand a year. He's approved for a $400,000 mortgage. So that's
and they didn't require proof, right? There's no proof of income.
None of that. So those mortgages that that were getting rotated, mortgage brokers were making a mint back in those days because they get a percentage of the mortgage origination fee. So those mortgages were all getting rolled into mortgage-backed securities and other instruments. Until the crap hit the fan a few years later. A lot of those were implemented like teaser rate mortgages. So basically, similar to our variable rate mortgages nowadays, where you're locked in at like prime minus a couple percentage points. But after a year, say, or 2 years, they're called the ARM mortgages, adjustable rate mortgages. They would flip back to a locked-in fixed at 30-year at say 5%. I'm just throwing hypothetical numbers out there. So some of these people are getting mortgages at 3%, and then after the year, it would click in at 5 or 6%, and their mortgage payment would basically double overnight. So there's a lot of that going on.
Financially uneducated people, they just did the math on the teaser rate.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
Just blind faith thought, they wouldn't give me this mortgage if they didn't think I could afford it, so I must be able to afford it. And
right.
They took it.
Yeah, exactly.
Only to get bankrupted later.
Yeah, exactly. So that's there's a lot of that happening. So that's what led up to a lot of that was what led up to the great financial crisis. So all these mortgages are packed into these securities, and then when people started defaulting, then the securities were like, holy crap, these things aren't worth par anymore.
Artificial demand that was just based on nothing.
Yeah,
vaporware, and that's why it would fall apart.
Yeah,
creating an asset bubble.
So the backers of these, the majority of them were backed by Fannie and Freddie Mae.
The government.
The government, back in these mortgage-backed securities, they had to start stripping out these defaulted mortgages out of these loan pools, by the hundreds of millions or billions, like billions. So what they would do is they strip them out, or they would just dissolve the mortgage-backed security completely and sell off the good ones, and then sell off the bad ones. So they would hold these not auctions, but there's only a few participants that could typically buy these. So it starts off with like Goldman Sachs, like you're buying by the billions. So some of like the really, really big, well-funded institutions were able to buy these, and it still goes on today. But there's a lot more smaller players in that space now. But so back the crash first happened in 2011, 12, 13, 14, and 15, they're selling them off. So they're getting sold off by the billions or hundreds of millions to a fund. Well, that fund would take it and say, okay, well, we don't want anything in under 100 grand. So they would sell those off. Or we don't want anything in XYZ state. They would sell those off. So they start selling them off in tranches. Some of these funds were just like turning around and flipping them, making 10% within a year or 6 months, and their IRR on that was incredible, right? Yeah. How it all trickled down is going from one fund to another. So they're not necessarily banks anymore. They're just institutions, like I said, like Goldman Sachs. There's a lot of entities set up by the likes of Goldman Sachs and even the Blackstone Group and KKR and all that. So they're buying these by the truckload. Not to mention that the majority of these funds were the ones that caused the crash in the first place, because they're the ones backing people getting these mortgages that should never have. Anyways, that's besides the point. So in order to buy these mortgages, guys like me would come along, and you just find out, through the grapevine networking, like who is selling these mortgages nowadays. At first it was kind of tough breaking into it, because you need to have some credibility. Like, say, hey, I'm gonna buy this loan. Especially if you're only buying one or two here and there. A lot of lenders or these institutions are not just gonna
they're used to doing volume.
Yeah, they're used to doing
with
volume,
the brand
first
name,
of all, but they also don't want to
back out or waste your time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because there's a lot of that used to happen apparently. So it just took some networking and building up credibility and joining some groups.
How long networking?
When I started into this, it was 2015. I was really researching it, probably for like 3, 4, 5, 6 months, really researching how this all worked. And then, so I was going back and forth from Florida back at the time, but I was here in Toronto, and there was a meetup group, popped up my phone, wrote her an email. Learn how to buy defaulted U.S. mortgages from Canada. Or I can't remember the exact title of this meetup group. I'm like, are you kidding me? Someone's already doing this here. This is like, wow, I got to go attend this. It was way up like north Toronto, Vaughan or something like that. So we go up there. It was like at a Panera Bread.
Very professional.
Yeah, I'm like, okay. Didn't think much of it, and there was like a little group in the back of like 10 people.
Sorry, for the listeners' benefit, Panera Bread's the slightly nicer version of Tim Hortons. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many there are left.
Yeah, I don't know if there's that many.
I know the COVID took some of them out.
Yeah, there's not that many around. Yeah, actually, I haven't seen any in a while. It might have been an Artisano, one or the other. But yeah, one of those.
Again, Artisano is just like a nicer Tim Hortons.
Yeah,
they sell coffee sandwiches, nice bread.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sorry,
so
continue.
That's where it was at. So it was in this back of the coffee shop, or what do you call it? And like 10 people there. And so I walk in, and I realize who's putting this on, so I'm talking for a few minutes, and so he does this presentation on how the whole thing worked. And since I'd been doing so much research already, I'm like, I think that totally makes sense to me. So he was putting on a little course. It was kind of like an intro, kind of a teaser. He's doing a course on how to do this. So I was like, well, I kind of understand the general concept already, and I've been buying foreclosure, so I know how to look at title, because that was one of his big things. You got to check the title, make sure there's not $28,000 of doggy doo-doo fines against the property. I said, can I just like partner up with you? And there's no better way to learn than to do, as opposed to taking another course, right? And at the time,
and they're more willing to work with you if you got money in it.
Yeah, exactly.
You're contributing.
Yeah, exactly. So he said, yeah. He was taking investors on, and lo and behold, he was from Canada. So he was. I wouldn't say he was just starting out buying defaulted mortgages, but he was doing seller financing in the U.S. for like already a number of years. So he already knew his way around the mortgage market and how to structure a loan and all that. Because what he was doing, like, I think starting in 2007 or 8, or right at the bottom of the market, he was buying like dirt cheap properties at tax lien sales and all that, and he was turning around and selling them on seller financing. So that's kind of how he got started, and then he got into default mortgage investing as well. Anyway,
sorry, seller financing. Who was financing it then?
So he would buy a property, let's say for like $20,000 at a tax lien sale in Columbus. I think that's where he started out. He'd turn around and sell it for $50,000. But hold a mortgage on it.
Oh, so you finance it for the new buyer.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So he'd done quite a few of those. So that's how. And then he worked for a
sorry,
fund.
It's just more curious.
Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
Was he charging a decent interest rate? Was he making good money on this? on the financing as well?
I can't remember exact. Usually, like I do some as well through the company, anywhere between like 8 and 12%.
Oh, so he's getting decent. Decent cash flow.
Yeah, because you're selling these to people that typically can't get a mortgage, and back in those days, no one was getting a mortgage when the great financial crisis happened, right? Like no one, because they unless you had like AAA credit score, 800 plus.
It's clever business.
Yeah, it was a really good business. So
it's kind of like rent to own, sort of.
It's similar to it's similar to it. I've done quite a few of them actually. When I've taken back in a foreclosure and you having a tough time selling them, it's like if you put them out for seller financing, you typically get what the price you want, and then you charge a pretty high interest rate. So and then once the borrower pays on time for like usually 6 to 12 months, usually the longer they pay, the better, like, the more pay history they have, their chances of default starts diminishing after a while. So they call it seasoning the mortgage or seasoning the note. So after a period of time, you can sell them again. So, like in that example, like, I'm just throwing hypothetical numbers out. If bought the thing for 20 grand at a tax sale, sold it for 50, or sold it to the borrower at 50, you collect a year's worth of principal and interest payments, well, at 10%, majority of it's interest, right? So it's basically 10% right there. And then you can't typically get par, but you can usually get like 80 to 90 cents on the dollar. So you turn around and sell it for say $45,000 to, in the US it's called an IRA investor, which is it's the exact same as an RSP here. So in the US you can actually put these into your IRAs. So you could buy the note and put it into your IRA and just collect. It's called mailbox money. So that's typically how it works. You turn around and sell it for 45 grand. You just made 100% return on your money in like a year, right? So, but that's not the main part of the business. I'm not sure where I was going with the story, but
I'm not sure either. It's okay. I get lost.
So this guy that was already doing it. So I partnered up with him. Put some my own money into the deal, and then I was working with this group out of California at the time. This one neurosurgeon, this doctor, I don't even know how we met, online somehow. He was building a rental portfolio, and I think at the time he had 40 or 50. He wanted to get up to 500 properties within like 3 years. So he's building out a team to do this. So he wanted to buy a bunch in Florida, and like I said, I'm not sure exactly how. It might have been on Bigger Pockets or something like that, where we started communicating, and then he invited me into his group calls of all these people from around the States.
And all doctors, neurosurgeons too, or something like that?
Yeah, so he had an investment group of doctors that were investing with him, and he was paying crazy returns, like 15% or something like that. Long story short, so I got him to invest with this other Canadian doing some of these deals. So at the time, you could buy these mortgages, like I said, back in 2015 for 40 cents on the dollar, 30 or 40 cents on the dollar. Now it's like 80 to a par. The price of them gone absolutely through the roof. But so when you're buying them at 40 cents, if you're selling them at, you're not going to sell them at $1, but let's say you did turn that around and you sold at 80 cents on the dollar, that's, you're doubling your money right there. And that was very common back in those days. Right. So there's lots of room for error there. You can make a lot of mistakes, like not catching a $28,000 doggy doo fine against the property. Like, I'm just throwing an example there, but that wouldn't bode well. But if there's something missed against the property for $5 grand or whatever, you could kind of eat that up. So like I said, there's lots of room for error. So I think we did probably half a dozen deals together, and I didn't get as much hand-holding, or I don't know what you want to call it, as much walking me through the process as I had thought when I joined up. But after doing it myself, I realized why, because it's kind of hard to teach somebody the ropes, because there's a lot of moving parts to it. So, especially when you've got numerous other deals that you have on the go. So I don't really blame the guy for not, giving me as much. He tried to help as much as he could, but after seeing, some of the mistakes that were made along the way, and we're still like knocking it out of the ballpark on the returns on these, I'm like, man, if this guy can do it, then there's no reason I can't do this like by myself. And that was around 2016, 17. And then 2017, at that point, I already knew a few people in the industry from networking. I'm like, yeah, I could definitely do this myself. And then, that was the start of, and I haven't looked back since. So everything I was doing before, like, buying from foreclosures, I was doing some turnkey rentals, another bad partnership with another guy I won't get into. One point I'll make is if you do get into partner with somebody, make sure you do your due diligence on them. I've learned that the hard way. Google them at the start, like it's so easy nowadays. I could tell you a story about a guy where anyway, I'll tell the story. I was partnership with this guy. Just overcame me one day to do some Googling on him. I don't know what came over me, but I found out he was in a lawsuit for $3 million.
Just one?
Well, he had several against him, but it eventually came to a $3 million judgment against him. And I'm like, man, I need to get out of this partnership as quick as possible and put liens on all the deals that I invested in, so that if he did get a lawsuit, I wouldn't lose out on him. Anyway, that's a story for another day. It's called lien stripping. In any event, so going back to 2017, that's I stopped doing everything else and started note investing full time, so buying defaulted mortgages. So that's my story. So I know you started out with a question like half an hour ago, but that's how we got here today.
So how many years? So actually, I can probably do the math, but if I check my notes, but like you started doing foreclosures back in 2013. And then what point did you think, and now what year are we that you're comfortable now doing notes?
2017.
So about a 4-year learning curve.
Well, no, so I didn't start learning about notes.
Yeah.
I didn't start learning about notes till 2015.
Okay.
And then, it was probably a year and a half, 2 years is when I made the transition full-time into notes, or transitioned to business, like fully into buying notes at that point.
Now I warned you about this.
Yeah.
Part of the reason is like I'm gonna have to guess that's a probably reasonable amount of time to learn this business, a year and a half to 2 years.
Oh yeah.
And you're a smart guy. You're a smart guy. Like you have history of like what would the term be? Would it be project management of building airports and casinos? Like
yeah, not so much project management, it was more of the design of them. Okay. So it was more like analytical stuff.
Okay.
However,
So sorry, were you like civil engineer then?
Yeah, civil structural engineer. So I started out as that.
Civil structural engineer. Okay.
Yeah. So I started out.
You're the guy I call when I need a bust in the basement looked at. Like you're.
Yes. Yeah. So I would be like guy to come on look at it and say, yeah, it's yay or nay.
Right.
You have to fix this, or it's going to stand for 100 years. So.
Right. So you're highly educated. You've been trusted with some multi-billion-dollar construction projects.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't in charge of them obviously, but where I was going to go with this was I did engineering design for about 5-6 years, and
on massive government
big
projects where the government has their eyes on it.
Yeah. But I was sitting at a desk all day long staring at a computer, and
so this is easy for you then.
Well, I was looking around the room, at the day, like back in the day, it was like downtown Toronto.
Yeah, work from office. Yeah, work in office. Yeah,
back before you could work from home. And I'm looking around the office, I'm seeing all these, like, no offense to some of these guys, like some people have a passion for it. I just didn't have the passion to sit behind a computer the rest of my life. And
because some people like to build stuff. I get it.
Yeah. So they eventually sent me out in the field to do like inspections. So I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. looking at what the contractors are, what corners they're cutting, which is usually pretty common.
Shit.
And I think the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back was one day I get sent out to a job site, and it was like the LCBO on Yonge and I can't remember the side street.
Because there's lots of LCBOs on
it was south of Eglinton. I can't remember the side street, but Yonge and Davisville. And it was built over top of a subway station. So like having bottles and bottles and bottles and bottles.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Of liquid, on the shelving. Yeah. So not only you had to worry about the weight, but it was the vibration of the subway. The subways underneath going by. You didn't want these things rattling off the shelf. So it had to be engineered up the wazoo. Like there was massive amounts of concrete and rebar to go into this. Anyway, so I get sent out to site. It's middle of January. It's like -20 out. Pulling in my car, and I hadn't even like stopped yet. I don't think, or hadn't got in my car yet. And I get this guy like knocking on my own, or standing at my door, and I open the door. I'm like, and I figured who it was. It was the rebar foreman, I think it was. And he starts screaming at me. He's like, "What are you guys doing? Putting so much rebar? We can't even get the concrete down in between." And he's just screaming me out. I'm like, "What the?" I'm like, I didn't actually do the design of this, but I'm trying to explain to him, like, this is like built over top of the subway, and he's like, I had no idea what went behind the design of it. And I'm just kind of like speculating at this point. Anyway, I go back to the office and I tell my boss, I'm like, "Yeah, I just got reamed out by the rebar foreman." Or he goes, "Oh yeah." He goes, "Every time I go there, it's the same old thing. He's always crapping about how over-designed everything is." And he goes, "The guy's about your age probably, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I look like." He goes, "You know how much that guy's probably making?" I'm like, "No, I don't know." And it was like basically double what I was making at the time. I'm like, "You got to be kidding me. Are you serious?" Anyway, so wasn't long after that. I'm like, man, so we used to call it the dark side. Contracting was the dark side when you're in engineering. I'm like, man, if you can't beat them, join them. So I ended up jumping ship, and I worked for Acon for quite a few years. And that's more when I got into not so much project management, but I was in like business development and estimating and, doing like multi-million-dollar projects. Like I think the biggest one bid on was like over $100 million. And I was kind of responsible a little bit for overseeing it while it was going on. So,
Right.
yeah, so it was a bit of a transition from engineering to going from that. And it was basically for sitting behind a computer all day, staring at a screen, going to basically sales. So, and I'm like naturally introverted. So it was a bit of an adjustment, but I'm like, man, I got to get out and network with people and meet people. And I can't just sit behind a computer and design stuff all day. But yeah, so yeah, that kind of transitioned into, it definitely helped me transition into real estate at that point. Because I realized also that I didn't want to be working for someone else the rest of my life. Not that it was a side hustle. I guess it was kind of a side hustle at the time when I started back in 2017 or 2007. But it was just, I want to get some additional, it wasn't so much the income, but I wanted to start building wealth back in those days. And it was tough working full time and building a real estate portfolio at the time, as I'm sure you can relate, because I think you used to work when you started yours as well, right? But yeah, it was a lot of hours. But then, at that day of reckoning, when I went down and saw the U.S., that conference down in Toronto, when they were touting these U.S. properties, and I thought, oh man, that's my ticket out of the corporate world. I could buy 5 or 6 of these properties and make 6 times the amount of rent, and it could be my ticket out of the corporate environment.
Yeah, you largely skipped our local real estate market to go to the States.
Well, no, I had stuff up until about 2014 here, I think it was.
Right.
Yeah, or 15, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Did you keep them long, or?
Yeah, well, I started accumulating 2007, 2008, 9. Remember 2009 was like, we thought the world was going to end here in Canada, and like we said earlier, it only blipped maybe 10 or 15%.
If you hit that.
Yeah,
it's almost not noticeable.
Yeah. So we everybody lucked out at that time, and then real estate just kept going up, and but the plan was originally was to move down to Florida, so it was kind of why at the time I really wanted to focus on investing on the state side back in 2013, 14. So that was kind of the game plan at the time. My wife and I at the time wanted to move down there. We ended up building a house, so we wanted to set up a business down there where we could be down there, obviously move down to something to move into, and ended up getting visas and everything for us, and then some unexpected life circumstances happened, and we ended up moving back and selling the place there. So it was like 2017, I think it was. But the nice thing about buying notes is it's called pushing paper. So it's not like you're managing a property, you're managing the actual mortgage, so you don't actually have to be there. But the nice thing nowadays is there's so much, everything's online, right? You can run almost any business nowadays, unless you're a brick and mortar business like a retail store. Mm-hmm. You can run so many more businesses nowadays from home, or having a cell phone in your laptop. Especially in the mortgage businesses, because you don't ever physically need to go to the property and you can have property management do it for you from a distance as well. You never need to go see a brick and see the bricks on the house. But nowadays you can send inspectors out. I have a few vendors where I can just put in an address and they'll go and take pictures for me. So that's one of the things that we look at for buying a mortgage, make sure the property's still there. That's the number one thing. But yeah, so it's so much easier to run from here now than probably would have been like even 10 years ago. So
I have so many questions.
yeah, go ahead. So I've
It's
been
been-
talking the whole time. Yeah, go ahead, shoot.
It's been a fascinating journey. Like it's been like there's been a lot of change in your journey, which I think is fascinating. And I want the listener to appreciate. Like you didn't know where you were going at the time, but you
Right.
just kept pursuing it.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so I have so many questions. Like for example, how come like until you and I were having lunch, I wasn't familiar with note buying.
Right.
And you and I were talking about before we were recording. It's been coming up a little bit about tax sales,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was saying how someone on my someone's promoting courses on tax lien sales.
Yeah.
Like so now I at least heard of those things.
Yeah.
Why is no one promoting note selling, note buying?
There's tons of people have come and gone in the past that put courses on.
Oh, course operators have come and gone.
Oh yeah.
Like gone completely, like they're bankrupt, like or they pivoted to something else.
well,
Tax lien sales.
So there's like if you type in tax lien sales, I've never actually Googled it myself, or I may have at one point in time. There's tons of gurus out there that'll
Right.
promote tax lien sales.
All American, I'm guessing.
Mostly American, but there's a few here in Canada. I remember there's a guy named Mike Wolf or something like that in Calgary. I don't know if he still does it or not. There's another guy, Cal Ewing, I think his name is, maybe. I think he's got a course. So there are courses, but there's not that many that are Canadian based.
Right.
It's mostly US based. Same as note investing. There's
But
tons.
it probably makes more sense to be in the States. Like the price points are lower.
Oh yeah, it's as you're getting into U.S. Investing. So investing stateside, in and itself, is a bit of a journey to get there. Like get your entity set up, get all of your contacts, get your boots on the ground. That in itself takes a good 6 months to a year, just to get settled. And I mean, you can buy a property off the bat, but I wouldn't suggest to someone just go and buy 10 properties all of a sudden. Like, start with one.
Unless you have like $1 billion, sure, go for it.
Well, even then,
that's
like,
dollar cost averaging.
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. I mean, if you've got money that you're not worried about, making a few mistakes here and there, then
Otherwise,
sure,
go
ahead and
slow.
do it.
Go
yeah,
slow.
go slow.
Yeah.
Learn the process. Get your entity set up properly. Learn how the tax system works there. Like the taxes between here and Canada are completely different. So that in itself is like I said, is a journey, and that's that was kind of when I set off in 2013. That was the stage I was at. Fast forwarding to notes, so note investing is probably one of the most complex things you could do in real estate investing. Tax liens is pretty complicated as well, but I wouldn't say it's nearly as complicated as because you just buy the tax lien or the tax deed, you just got to make sure that the title's clear.
Right.
And you got to make sure the property's still there and not burnt
Right.
down.
But you're not waiting for the tax lien. You're at the earlier stage.
Yeah. So when you buy a mortgage, you have to make sure, or you have to be careful that typically the taxes aren't paid on these things, on these properties. You got to make sure, and every state's different, and even some counties within states are different. You got to make sure that it's not imminently going to a tax sale. So there's a difference between a tax lien and a tax deed sale. So tax lien just means that you didn't pay your tax. It's usually 2 years. Some states is 1 year. You didn't pay your taxes for a year. The city needs that money, so they'll come in, or they'll put them up for an auction, a tax lien sale auction, and so an investor will come in, buy that tax lien. They typically have an interest rate set to them. So tax liens are usually pretty small, like $1,000 to $5,000 depending on the value of the property. But the interest rates usually range up to like 18%. So if you're a tax lien buyer, you want to do them by volume. So you want to buy, say, like 10 or 15 or 20 or whatever the case may be, and you're getting that 10, that whatever 15, 18, 20%. I don't think it goes. I think 18 is the highest I've seen. So that's a tax lien. So after a couple of years, depending on the state, depending on the county, that tax lien buyer, if the owner of the property hasn't paid that tax lien off, then they can start the foreclosure process. And that then goes into a tax foreclosure and you get, so when you're a tax deed buyer at a tax foreclosure sale, you get the property, and that tax lien holder gets paid out whatever they were, And if there's any money that gets, like, let's say there's $5,000 of the tax lien has been paid for a couple years, he goes to foreclosure, usually $2-3 grand worth of legal fees. So the maximum, like, he'll want his $8,000 back, let's say, in total costs so far into the tax lien. Someone might come along, the property say it's worth 100. They may say, well, heck, that's a great deal. I'm going to buy this. I might pay 70, 80, maybe not that high, 60, $70,000. So that it's called a tax overage. So that 70 minus the 8,000, you're looking at 62 grand. Like I said, just hypothetical numbers. That's called a tax overage. Some states, you can, if you're the mortgage holder, so if you're the first lien mortgage holder, you can recover that, but it's a long, drawn-out process. I've had to do it a couple times. Some states like Michigan, they actually keep it. And it doesn't go to anybody, like not even the owner. So first in line is any mortgage holders, or if there's any liens on the property, they get paid out first, and then whatever's left over is the property owner.
Right.
So it's kind of almost like selling the property. However, there's a few states where it like Pennsylvania is a good one. It goes to tax lien first, and if it doesn't, it goes to tax lien sale. And then if no one buys it, then it goes back into the coffers at the county, and then they'll have a tax deed sale within a year. And that's when you get completely wiped out. Like, you as a mortgage holder,
right,
or the property owner, you get nothing. Yeah. Like,
wait, who gets all the money?
The county or the city or
Sounds
very
profitable for them.
Oh yeah. Well, that's how they recoup their coffers when people don't pay their taxes. So, it's
at the real estate investor's expense.
Well, whoever the owner, or if you're the mortgage holder.
Scary.
Yeah. So
that's wild.
And like I said, in every state,
so this
is
is not
different.
for the faint of heart. This strategy. You need to put in some time to have your diligence and.
Yeah. So when you're doing due diligence on these mortgages before you buy them, that's one of the number one things to look out for is is there any taxes owing? Typically there is. What kind of a tax state is it? Is it a tax lien first, or is it a tax deed? Like, I know some people that if it's already into a tax lien situation, they won't buy it because they're like, oh, I've lost the property. The property's gone. I'm like, well, no. Like, I'll buy a lot of them. I'll buy as many as I can find that has a tax lien on it, because people get scared away from those. But those are the ones that the funds can't sell because people are getting scared away by them. But I'm like, well, I'll buy it because this guy still has to file for foreclosure. And as a matter of fact, as opposed to me having to go for foreclosure, I've had 2 deals now where the tax lien holder filed for foreclosure. So they had to spend all the money on the legal fees. They had to take it through and it's a lot quicker than doing a mortgage foreclosure, usually about 3 to 6 months, whereas a mortgage foreclosure can take a couple years. So I've had a couple where I just let it go to the foreclosure. I made sure I watched the bid on the property, or on the tax sale, that it was above what I was owed on the mortgage, and just let it go to sale, and then I just applied, and then I got my money from the so.
So you let the city take it back to sell the property. You get your exit. You don't have to pay any fees.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, that rarely happens. Like, that rarely happens because, like, if it's only like 5 or 10 grand owing on the property, and the owner can't pay that, like they're obviously in dire straits at that point, right? If they can't come up with like 5 or 10 grand, they're in dire straits. If if the property's worth 100 grand, like, they just lost tons and tons of equity. However, the mortgage is in there too, so the equity might be less than that. But yeah, in a couple of deals, and there's been one as well, I think, where the borrower, like my borrower, it went to a tax sale, and I can't remember the exact details, but the judge at the tax sale made the borrower pay off my mortgage too. So, or not my mortgage, but my company's mortgage. So I think he made him sell the property or something like that. I can't remember exactly how that worked, but yeah, that's the number one danger in the business is taxes.
So this is not get rich quick stuff.
No, it's get rich slow. Like, it's not like you can just jump into this and make 7 figures in 1 year. Like, you might make like 0 the first 3 years and then slowly build up. You need to scale as well. Like, you can't just buy a couple here and there and expect to get rich off it. Like, you need to slowly build up your inventory. So the nice things about these mortgages, and I guess I haven't really gotten into how they work exactly, but when you buy them when they're in default, there's a number of different they call them exit strategies, to get, eventually get, recapitalized from your money that's gone into it. The main two are, you have to either take it to foreclosure, or the borrower in the property comes to the table and says, hey, listen, I want to keep this property. I haven't paid in a couple of years. I lost my job. I've got another job again, whatever the case may be. So you negotiate a new payment plan for them. Like, let's say they're, I don't know, $10,000 behind in their mortgage payments. They may not have the $10,000 to reinstate it. It's called the reinstatement. You may say, okay, listen, can you give me like half of that, or a couple grand? Because you want them to have some kind of skin in the game, to, like, if it's already in foreclosure. Because if you stop foreclosure, you got to start it up all over again. So you want to make sure that you get enough from them to stop the foreclosure, so you don't have to go through the whole process again. So if they've got some skin in the game, then you work out a payment plan for them. May or may not be lower than they're paying before. Depends on their situation, what their income is. So the nice thing about that is if you can get them to start paying again, you now have a steady income stream. So it's like, holding a rental property at that point. And if you get enough of those, you can start. There's another guy in my investing circle. He calls it income stacking. So you get one, you get them to start paying again. Get another one, you get them to start paying again. I think he buys more performing loans, but my strategy is buy them all defaulted, because you can get better deal on them. Or I used to be able to get a better deal on them, and it's kind of flipped recently, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, if you get enough of them, you keep accumulating them, and then then you can start building up cash flow. So you get enough cash flow, and then you can start selling them off after a year or two, or whatever the case may be, and then you can sell them at a premium versus what you paid for them. So if you bought it at, say, 60 cents on the dollar, and you can turn around and sell it at 80 cents on the dollar, then there's your uptake on. So it adds to your return. So
who are you selling to?
So guys like myself, other funds, guys that have funds. I was mentioning earlier, I guess, that
like big funds or small funds?
Depends. Like, so there's a few funds where I bought from, and then there's a few brokers in this business there's only a very few trusted brokers in this business, and if you get blacklisted by these guys, you're done. Like, anyway, so you got to stay in these guys' good books. But
right. So it's really like everyone knows everybody.
Oh yeah, it's a very small niche. Even though it's in the U.S., like, everybody knows everybody. I've been to a handful of conferences over the years, and I speak at a few of them, and it's the same people there. I see a few people come and go, but it's the same group of people. So yeah, we're basically buying and selling to each other, but there's some bigger funds, like, there's some multi-million-dollar, like billion-dollar funds that are in this, that maybe not I'd say $100 million funds that typically buy from, but I put out a few from to this broker, and he'll come back and say, okay, your bid was here's their price, you accept it, and my guess. So we go back, and he'll so old school. He'll connect us through email. Here, you guys start doing your due diligence. Chad, you provide them whatever due diligence documents they need. And there's been a couple times I'm like, oh my God, these guys are buying from little old me, like my little old company. And like, these guys are like $100 million fund. It's normally reverse of that, but no, normally when I'm selling loans, I'll sell them off to, like I talked about, IRA investors before, where someone just wants to plunk it into their IRA, where they can just collect the mailbox money.
Right, which is it's different than 401k.
Yeah.
IRA investing.
Yeah, so it's like an IRSP. So IRA, you can set up it's called a self-directed IRA, same as here, right? You can set up a self-directed IRSP. If you want to do it through, Olympia Trust. So you'd have to set up something similar to that structure, where it's within a trust. There's numerous, like, I don't know how many trust companies here in Canada. There's only a handful. In the U.S., there's dozens and dozens and dozens, and I see them at the conferences all the time, because they're always touting putting these types of investments into into like people's self-directed IRAs. So that's usually who I sell them to, is to or not directly, but like, there's a couple of exchanges that'll put them on, because they get quite a bit of like retail traction. Guys looking for smaller price deals, where, like I said, they can just put them in their IRA. So
So any of these notes, are any of them similar to like a traditional flip, as in like you kind of like fix it up?
Oh yeah. So when I first started into it back 2015, I had the mindset of taking the property over, right? That was my mindset going into it, and I'm like, I was introduced about buying these things before it got to foreclosure and getting and you could get a like much better deal before it got to the foreclosure because these big funds were paying stupid money. I am, like I said, back in the day, you're buying 40 to 60 cents on the dollar. I mean, obviously there's a lot more that goes into it. There's, your legal costs and holding costs, and, it could add up to $10, $15, $20,000 eventually. But at the end of the day, you're still a way better deal than buying directly at the foreclosure auctions.
And then you're competing with deep pocket people.
Yeah, exactly. So since you're getting such a good deal on it, the world's your oyster what to do with this property when you take ownership of it. So my intention originally was to do what I was doing before, either turn around selling it quick or fixing up and selling it, doing like a rehab on it. But what I quickly learned was taking a property back is the least profitable of all of them, and it's the most risk because you're taking back a property that could be a total nightmare, and oftentimes they are, and they've got all these liens against them and everything. But the most profitable strategy is when the borrower starts paying again, and you turn around and you flip that note, so you turn around and sell that note again. But yeah, so I'll take back, the odd time, it's just but most it used to happen a lot more back, first got into it where. So the mortgage is underwater, or the property's underwater. So the mortgage balance is up here, and the property value is down here. So they call it a underwater mortgage, which is starting to happen around here a lot more. It's gonna be a lot more of carnage coming. I think we're gonna be seeing a lot more power sales here, and it's already doubled. I think the last year. Saw a stat on it the other day. Many events. So when the properties were underwater, a lot of these borrowers didn't want anything to do with the property, right? Because it's like, well, this thing's worth, the mortgage is way more than the property's worth. So they were, either stick their head in the sand and you'd have to foreclose on them, or they would sign the property over. It's called the deed in lieu. So that used to happen way more back when I started into this, probably like well over 50% of the time, 60, 70% of the time. Now it's reversed. Now the property prices have gone way up. Their mortgage balances are less and they have equity. So they're, a lot more willing to come to the table and make a deal now. So, but yeah, I took back a condo a month or two ago, I guess. So I'll do like a rehab on one a year, because rehabbing from a distance, like even rehabbing in your backyard, is tough. It's tough doing it, especially in a new state when you have no contacts there. I've been burned way too many times by contractors over the years when I've tried to fix some properties on these REOs that I've taken back. But I have a condo right now in North Carolina, and I got a deed. Yeah, it was a deed in lieu. Oh, long story. The condo association owned it because they foreclosed on the borrower prior to, because he wasn't paying his dues.
Condo fees, yeah.
So I ended up making a deal. It's called cash for keys. I paid him, a small amount for them to sign the deed over to me. So I took this condo back, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna fix this thing up, put a few bucks into it so I can, if I was gonna sell it as is.
Sorry, you're doing this all remotely as well?
Oh yeah. So like I said, I do like one a year, maybe two a year, because the stress that goes into this, and it takes like 80% of my time, like doing these things. But when I go into one of these deals, I look at it, I'm like, okay, if I sell it as is, I can make X percent. But if I put some money into it, if I can make 100% of the money on what I have to put into it, then I'll do the deal. So like this condo, for instance, let's say, I could sell for 50 grand. But if I put, 15 or 20 into it and I can make 40 more grand on it, then that's when I would do the deal. Just because it only makes sense from just all the coordination that goes into it, and the headaches and dealing with contractors, and it just takes a lot of time. So, so I decided to fix this thing up. I know I'm digressing a little bit, but I think we talked about this over lunch. So the meter was pulled on this thing, because this thing's been vacant for a few years. So electric companies typically pull the meters because people steal hydro, or they don't call it hydro down there, but they steal power. People hook up wires to them. So they just pull the meter right off so that people can't steal power. Well, when they do that, I've had 4 or 5 now probably where the meter was pulled, and I had to get the city to come in they do an inspection. This has been a month, and I still haven't even got the power turned on yet, because in the state of North Carolina, you need to get a licensed contractor to pull a permit just for the city to come down and inspect the, the bloody thing. And I just found this out like last week after like me applying for the permit and then the inspector turning it down, the permit down. He hadn't even gone out, and I called him up the other day. I said, why did this fail? Like, what happened? Like, what was wrong with the electrical equipment? Like, you know, is it what needs to be replaced? He says, oh no, you can't pull the permit because it's in your company's name. I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, you can't pull it personally. You need to hire an electrical contractor to do it. I'm like, okay, this is news to me. This is the first thing, you know. Like I said, every state is different. So anyway, like I said, I'm digressing, but yeah, it's been a month. It's been a month and I haven't gotten anywhere yet, except for clean the bloody thing out. I've got quotes and everything. I've got contractors all lined up, ready to go. It's just, but they can't do stuff in the dark, right? And I need to turn the power on to see what needs to be replaced, like electrical wise. Probably I think the HVAC system needs to be replaced in it. But you know, this one, hopefully, you know, knock on wood, it's still going to be a good return once get the sink fixed up and sell it. But yeah, man, I've had like the worst deal I ever did was St. Louis. Took this property back, and as opposed to hiring so I got some quotes from some general contractors, and they were like, you know, at the time they looked absolutely redonkulous to me how big their prices were. So I thought, I'm just gonna sub this out myself. So I started.
You see it yourself remotely.
Yeah. That was probably the biggest mistake I ever made in my life. So I walked away from that with a $40,000 or $50,000 loss. Yeah, so that was I chalked that one up to a good learning lesson on what not to do.
So it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
No, it's not. But you know, like I said, that one I should have. And I could have sold it and taken I think it was like a $5,000 loss at the time. You know, hindsight's 2020. You know, spent like a year and a half trying to rehab this thing and took a $50,000 loss or 40 or whatever it was. So hindsight's 2020, right? You know, so when I get a deal like that nowadays, I'm like, you know, I use my, you know, my little formula. If I put X amount into it, if I get this much more of a return, then I'll do it. And that one, it was like not even close. So I was like, why do you even bother trying to? Although, you know, the budget kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger because it was like a 100-year-old house, and every time, you know, the contractor went in and did something, you know, it needed this and then it needed that, and then the thing was on the edge of a cliff and it was sliding down the hill, and oh man, we'd reinforce it. Like it was like one of those nightmares that just never ended. And then
so you need a tough stomach.
And then on that one, when you know, it looked like we're almost at the finish line, I don't know why, but I can't remember who. I had several plumbers in there, but out of the several plumbers, they never told me that the drain line to the street was plugged. So you know how much it is to replace a drain line?
Like $3,000.
Oh, it was thousands, yeah. So they had to get a hoe in to. that was definitely one of the straws that broke the camel's back on that deal too. It was just like, man, at that point I was at, because I think we had it for, that's what it was. The inspector came in, that's right, and he put his camera down there and found that it was completely plugged. Yeah.
But you do make money at this, don't you?
Yes. I'm just telling you some of the horror stories.
So no one gets into it.
Yeah. I mean, like, so, you know, I was telling you earlier, I use the baseball analogy. You know, there's first base hit, you know, make your 10 or 20% return. Second base is like 20 to 30. Third base is like 30 to 40 to 50. Then you have your home runs or 50 to 100%, and then you have your grand slams that are like, you know, well over 100% return. So I want to try to keep in like, you know, the third base when I'm bidding on these. Usually shoot for about a 30% return, and that's cash on cash. Like that's not levered, right? So, you know.
Yeah, no one's lending you on this.
No, there are a few lenders out there, but you know their rates are absolutely sky high. Well, they weren't all that bad in comparison to now, because you know interest rates were at 2-3%. You know, they're 4 points up front, 4% up front, and then
wow,
it was like hard money loan. So you know, hard money loans are typically 4 and 10 or 4 and 12, right? Well, they were a lot less than that the last couple years, but
that's expensive.
Yeah, so
4% lender fee and 10% interest.
Yeah,
wow,
yeah, like minimum, yeah, to lend on these. But you know, if you're getting a 30% return, then it's still pretty good. If you got nothing out of pocket, you know, it's an infinite return, right? But excuse me, my model is to I'll bring investors on and we just do like a split, some kind of a split, usually 50-50 sort of thing. So when I do the math, when you pencil it out, it's like, well, I could take a loan, hard money loan, and end up at the end of the day the same amount of money in the pocket, right? So.
And so you said 50-50. So the partner puts in all the cash.
Yeah.
And they get half the profits.
Yeah. Yeah.
And losses.
Right.
Right. So then, like, I don't know. We're using a baseball analogy. Like, what is your batting average then? Because it sounds like you do have to forecast for losses, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be strikeouts.
Right.
So it's, I don't know, what is your batting average?
Or
what is your slugging percentage? Is probably a better analogy.
Historically?
No, what do you, okay, so 2 questions. Like, what are you targeting, and then what is historic?
So targeting, I used to target 40%, 40 to 50.
Yeah.
And I usually bid on a very conservative basis. So, the first few years doing this, I was hitting 50% easily.
Right. Partly market dependent.
Yeah. Like I said, back in those days, you could buy stuff for 40, 50 cents on the dollar. Now it's more like 80 cents on the dollar. But so now I shoot for like 30%, and still bid conservatively. And when I say conservative, I'm conservative, way more conservative than most people out there. So if I bid on 100 and I only get 1 or I get 0, the old adage is the best deal is the ones that you never get. Usually, the ones that go to all the hell because you overbid on it, right? So those are usually. So if I bid on a whole bunch and I don't win it, it's like, oh well, let some other poor soul take this off my hands, because
I call it the first loser.
Yeah, exactly.
You're first place, but you lost, man.
Yeah, exactly.
How are you gonna make these numbers work?
Yeah. So I'm a little more choosier these days on the deals that I. It all boils down to Pareto's principle. The 80-20 rule. You make 80% of your profits on 20% of the deals, right? So so when I got back in 2017, 18, by 2019 I was pretty confident. I wanted to get up to about 300 in inventory.
300 notes a year.
Yeah, or get up up to that many. I think it was over 100 at that point, and I was taking on way too much. When I say way too much, I was buying portfolios where I didn't have enough time. I mean, I had people helping me doing the due diligence, but when you're buying a portfolio of those things, you can't hone in on each one and pick out, this sold in the tax lien sale, or this has got umpteen dozen municipal fines against it. You can, but it takes a lot of time. Like, you need like a team of people to go through these things, because usually you only have
AI
well, even AI it probably wouldn't help either, unless you'd have an AI calling up the city saying, is there any fines against this?
God,
I guess you could probably figure out how to do that, but
there you go.
So you lose. So you make your money when you're buying. This is true in anything in real estate, right? You make your money when you buy. So if you buy a portfolio, you start missing these things that that starts striking against you when you start working these things out. So I started buying portfolios, and I was just not losing control, but it's like, oh man, I didn't see, or like, I missed that, or I missed that. But then when COVID hit, everybody thought the world was ending. And man, hindsight's 2020. I said that a lot today. Some of these funds were selling them for like pennies on the dollar, because they just wanted to get rid and liquidate, because everybody wanted their money out of all these funds. And I was, like everybody else, frozen. I'm like, I'm not buying anything right now. But 6 months later, things started taking off again, and it's like, man, I wish I had capitalized on that opportunity when I had the chance. I know a few guys that did, and that just made out like bandits on them. But when COVID hit and real estate went up in pricing, well, so did these mortgage notes. So so now that there's equity in all of these, the mortgage notes that have equity tend to they command a higher price, so you don't get as much of a discount. So now that most of these things have equity in them, the risk is less, because the property is worth more than the note in most cases, and you don't take the property back. And it turns out that it needs to be bulldozed, like a couple of the deals I've taken back, and I'm not joking. They literally need to be bulldozed, and the city would come out, put a condemnation sign on it. The prices of these things went up so much where they were trading at like, I'd be lucky to make a single-digit return or a low double-digit return, and that's if all the stars aligned. Like if everything went up right on this note, because as you can tell, you get a lot of curveballs thrown at you when you're dealing with these things that come out of left field. That you're like, oh man, I never saw that coming. So that's if all the stars align. I'm like, man, so I'm just like, I'm not making like, I'll be lucky to break even if I, buy a bunch of these at this price, and I'd rather just, like I said, just scale. Like I've scaled back a fair bit just because, and I mentioned earlier the 80-20 principle. Like I looked at it, I'm like, man, I'm making no money on 80% of these, or barely anything, and these are the ones where I'm making all the money from. So I'm like, I'm just gonna focus on the 20%. And now that I've been bidding these things for like 8 years, like I've got a pretty elaborate spreadsheet or program that I developed over the years, a pricing modeler, where I can put all the numbers in and do all my exit strategies and do like a weighted average on which, how I think that these are going to play out. And I can see that like they almost jump off the spreadsheet at me. Like, oh man, this is like going to be a home run deal. And I'm going to put my bid in at this. And, 8 times out of 10, I don't get accepted. But for the 2 times out of 10, then it's like, oh man, this is going to be a home run, hopefully. And then there's been some surprises. Like I bought some, so there's a fund that this guy, like he's well known in the industry. He was the first one to do a crowd fund. So in the U.S. you can do crowdfunding, where I think you do it here in Canada too, but I don't know what it's called. But you can invest as little as $100, and you don't have to be accredited.
Right, like Addy Invest.
Yeah. So there's thousands and thousands and thousands of investors that invest in this, and it's all done online. Like they just do their spiel, and people put in $100 or $1,000, whatever the case may be. So this guy, like, man, he was killing it for the first few years. He raised about $50 million, and bought a whole bunch of loans, like thousands. And like I said earlier, it's great if you're buying all these loans and building this huge portfolio, but if you don't do your proper due diligence, then that's where
hard.
you get.
Yeah, it'd be hard to do a lot of diligence on 1,000 deals, 1,000 properties.
Yeah, so he had thousands,
especially if they're all over the place.
Yeah, they're all over the states. So it's not just him; he's got a whole team. Like I don't know how many people, dozens of people working for him. So they're in some financial difficulty, so he's having to shut his fund down, and he was selling a bunch, like probably over 1,000 back in the spring, I think it was. So I got a whole bunch accepted. So as I'm doing my due diligence on him, I'm like, 1/3 of these have sold in a tax sale. 1/3. I'm like, holy cow! Like, no wonder they're having financial difficulties. So
Not that bad.
Yeah. So, but they're still trying to sell them. So that's not a problem in this business. Not problem, but it's caveat emptor. Like, if you buy that loan and it's already sold in a tax sale, you're out of luck. Like, you're not going to get your money back.
You bought nothing.
Yeah, you bought a piece of paper for.
It's worth nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. But part of that deal, I started with, I can't remember how many I got accepted, 30 or 50, something like that. I whittled it down to like 4 or 5 maybe, and like the couple of surprises on them, but like one of them reinstated right away. I think it was like $20,000 worth. I'm like, wow, I didn't see that coming. That was more than we paid for the loan, right? So yeah, there's some good deals to be had in this, but yeah, it's just it's nice to have a blend, so that you can, the ones that you take the major loss on, then you counteract it with a home run deal, right? So, and then you kind of want everything in the middle. But like I said, I kind of strive for the second, third base hits that, you're pretty safe on them, and you're going to get a pretty decent return on it, and you're not going out to go for the home run or grand slams. Although, like I said, I do find the needle in the haystack the odd time with the grand slams. And as a matter of fact, I think I found one yesterday. Maybe not a grand slam, but I think it's a home run deal. I doubt anybody that from this $1 billion fund is listening to this, but I won't go into any more details on that, because I don't want them to realize that I may have found this really good deal that I'm probably going to put a bid in today or tomorrow on. So, like I said, those are the ones that kind of jump off the page at me now. It's like, oh man, these. So what normally happens is they'll have the balance of the mortgage, either bid off the lower of that or the lower of the property value, because you don't want to pay more than the actual property's worth. Sometimes they get the value of the property wrong, so that's where.
Like a keying error?
No, it's just
Bad appraisal?
Bad appraisal, yeah. So since I was buying foreclosures way back when, I developed a pretty elaborate tool that it was like API based, where I could pull in all the data from different like Zillow and like Redfin and all that, where it would give me comparables. So since
so you created your own comparable tool. Comparable analysis tool.
Yeah, exactly. It broke a couple years ago because they all changed their APIs, and it took me 3 or 4 years to build. Like it was like a work in progress. And then when they changed all their APIs, I'm like, I'm not a programmer whatsoever. I'm like, I don't want to have to go through and fix this. I could probably hire someone to do it, but any event, I got really good at valuing really low end properties, because that's typically the ballpark I play in is like the lower value properties, because you typically get higher returns on those, and then borrowers tend not to fight as much. So if you're buying a property or a mortgage on a property is worth $1 million, and the guy's got a $200,000 income, but he's not paying his mortgage. Well, he still has a $200,000 income. Where do you think that money's going? He's paying a lawyer to keep him out of foreclosure, right? Anyway, but if a borrower's in a $50,000 property, they tend not to have as the wherewithal to do that. Although I've learned the hard way that some lawyers will do a lot of work pro bono and help these borrowers out. Even though, we're not here to foreclose on people, we're here to work out a deal with them to keep them in the property. But yeah, like I said, there's some lawyers that'll work for pro bono and basically make things really difficult for you. But anyway, get back to the point. These lower price properties, yeah, I really honed in a really good system on how to value these things. So the odd time I'll see on a mortgage tape is called, or spreadsheet, I'll see a value that's way out of whack. So usually when these sellers are selling them, they'll inflate the values by like way more than they should. That's typically the norm. Reason being is they're not typically doing it on purpose, but they'll hire like an appraiser or a realtor to do a comp analysis. It's called the BPO in the U.S., broker price appraisal. Yeah. So they'll just take the average of like what's sold in the area, which is fine. That's what you'd normally do for a comp.
Yeah, but does that, yeah.
When it's a foreclosure, especially
there's something wrong with it. Yeah.
It's typically worth 30% less than the average. Like, I'm just throwing a number out there, but that's usually what you see is 30% less or more even in some cases. So yeah, the odd time you'll see on a tape, I'll go through each one and I'll look at the value of the property. I'm like, oh man, they've got this thing way undervalued. So I can snag that on, based on what they think it's worth. Yeah, so the one I'm looking at, I won't throw any hard numbers out there, but I think they said it was worth like 60 something. And I'm like, man, there's stuff selling around here for like 200 grand. Not in like foreclosure shape, but like people are buying these to fix them up and sell them for 200 grand. So they call that the after repair value, ARV. So that's typically what I look for. If I know that I can buy this at like say 30 or 40 cents on what the ARV is, I'm like, man, I could like either rehab that myself, or I'm gonna turn around and sell that to an investor for 50 cents of the ARV, right? So I know that there's a lot of meat on the bone there. So that's typically what I look for nowadays. Those more profitable deals, as opposed to like during when I had over 100, 150 or whatever it was, I was pulling my hair out. Like
150 notes.
Yeah. I was pulling my hair out. And like I said, 80% of those wasn't making any money on, because
that's terrible.
Yeah. So like I said, I kind of took a step back. I'm like, man, I'm only making money on 20% of these, and these are the types of deals that I need to pursue nowadays. Right. So. Yeah.
And then where do you see things now? Because before we were recording, you were looking at ramping up business more.
Yeah. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the price of these things have absolutely gone astronomical with COVID. Because they're run up in real estate prices. As you're well aware, the last couple of years, mortgages have been coming out at, or they were getting originated at 2.5–3% in the U.S. And those things were turning around and selling them, like, performing mortgages that were packaged into securities. They're selling at like par or above, like insane. Like people are paying like over par for a 3% mortgage. So like, their long-term return on these were 2.5, right?
It's like buying a bond.
Yeah, basically. So now that
That
now
doesn't make
that
any sense.
now that they're at like 7 or 8%, no one's willing to pay par for these 2 or 3%, 4% mortgages anymore. So those are now trading like in the 80s. So non-performing prices, default mortgages are they kind of they follow the same trend as the ones that are selling in the billions that are the mortgage-backed securities. So starting to see a little bit of relief in the pricing. Not as much as I thought by now there would be, but so yeah, I think now's time to start ramping up a little by little to take advantage of these lower price
Right.
mortgages where
Because you feel the prices are coming down.
yeah, exactly.
As they feel more pain from the higher rates.
Right.
And the economy slows down.
Right, exactly. So I see, guys in my circle have been calling this for like over a year now, like, oh, there's gonna be a wave of foreclosures and a wave of these hitting the market. Well, it hasn't happened yet because the U.S. economy is still so resilient because
the economy is strong, 30-year mortgages.
Yeah, everybody's locked in a 3-year mortgage. The U.S. government's pumping in $1.7 million above and beyond what they're collecting. So, in other words, a deficit every year. So there's a tidal wave of money still coming in that's what's propping up the economy right now. Whereas in Canada, sure, we were spending money like drunken sailors a couple years ago when COVID happened, but what's our deficit now, like 40 or 50 billion?
I don't even know. It's just
Like
out of control.
If it's 10 times the economy in the U.S. as it is here, that would put us on par spending $160 billion a year. But yeah, I checked the stats a couple weeks ago, and like I think our deficit's only it's down to like 40 billion. So I'm like, I don't want to get into politics. So I'm like, okay, a little bit of kudos for who's in power right now for getting that down to where it is. But yeah, in the U.S. They're in for a rude awakening. They're trying to issue bonds right now. That's why the long end of the 10-year, 20-year, 30-year treasuries, the interest rates going up on them is because U.S. government is putting out another $1.5 billion worth of bonds in the next 6 months, and all of their buyers are disappearing, like China. So China's a net seller. Japan was still buying, but they're starting to apparently unload as well. So the only people left that are going to be buying these anymore are going to be the Fed or, U.S. in general.
Yeah.
So
they may make the banks do it or the pensions buy them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if the Fed has to stump it again, well, they're going to have to start printing more money, and there goes inflation again, right? So, so that's my view on why the U.S. economy is doing as well as it is versus Canada. Canada's still trickling. Like there's starting to be a bit of a divergence I'm seeing between the two, but I mean I could be totally wrong. Maybe a different story next quarter from now. But anyway, that's where my view is on where things are heading. So,
Chad, I've had a blast because I don't know anyone who does what you do.
No, there's not many of us.
I like geeking out. Yeah, like you said, there's only like 2 of you in all Canada.
Yeah, so the guy I started investing with, he's still doing it. He's doing really well. And there's another guy that he's dabbling a little bit. I won't mention his name, that I see on Facebook the odd time. He's doing the odd deal here and there. So I'm reached out and kind of encouraged him. I said, hey, and I might actually, I'll see if he wants to partner up one of these days, do the asset management side of things. So, but yeah, there's not too many. I mean, there might be others that just aren't active on social media and stuff. But yeah, it's you give your elevator pitch. People ask what you do, so I tell them the blank stares I normally get is pretty astounding. But it is I do get a lot of people that are quite intrigued by like, oh, how does that work exactly?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Because again, like I don't think I'm gonna bet you most people don't know anyone who does what you do.
No.
Yeah.
No. I think there's a lot of companies that are out there doing it, like at a grand scale, but no one like not that individuals like through my company, but yeah, there's not many of us in this business. So. And
then if people want to follow along your journey, where can they find you?
Probably the best thing is just look me up on Facebook, Chad Urbshott, URBSHOTT. I've got a website as well. Company's called Equigrowth Capital, and the website's EQUIGROWTH.com. Yeah, I'm not a big social media person, so yeah, if you want to get a hold of me, or LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn as well. Just look me up on LinkedIn, but yeah, I'm not like an Instagram or. I do have a Twitter account, but it's more for crypto. So
Fabulous. Chad, thanks so much for doing this.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to invest in real estate from scratch, my team teaches beginners how to use the #1 investment strategy that I personally use in a virtual free training class every month. Go to investortraining.ca/YouTube to register for our next class. The link's also in the description as well. I publish at least 2 to 3 videos a week here, so subscribe if you want to keep learning from seasoned investors like myself and my guests. And if you're just starting out, feel free to ask questions and comment below, and I do the best to answer each of those comments and questions myself. Again, if you're ready to learn the nitty-gritty about real estate investing from a professional investor, register for our next virtual class. That's at investortraining.ca/YouTube. Thanks again for watching. See you in the next video.